In the sun-kissed cradle of Libya's ancient coasts, a people's world was swallowed by the wolf of Rome. From 146 BC to 23 AD, the Roman eagle cast its long shadow over the land, absorbing the former territories of Carthage and the Greek colonies. This conquest would transform Libya into one of the empire's most prosperous provinces, yet this prosperity was built upon a foundation of sorrow and loss. Let's journey back to 146 BC. The Third Punic War ends not just with a victory, but with an obliteration. Carthage, the once mighty rival of Rome, is razed to the ground. Its fields are famously, perhaps mythically, sown with salt, a symbolic act to ensure nothing would ever grow there again. For the people of the region, this was a devastating blow. The fall of Carthage was more than the defeat of a city, it was the erasure of a civilization, a culture, a way of life. The air itself seemed heavy with the ghosts of Punic mariners and merchants. Their whispers carried on the wind through the newly silent ruins. As Roman legions marched across the North African landscape, their disciplined formations were a stark contrast to the weary faces of the local villagers watching from the sidelines. These were the descendants of Phoenicians, Greeks, and the indigenous Berber tribes, peoples who had lived and traded on these shores for centuries. Now, they were subjects of a new, formidable power. The initial conquest created a deep social chasm. On one side stood the Roman conquerors, the soldiers, administrators, and soon, the colonists. On the other were the conquered, the Libyans, whose ancestral lands were now being carved up into Roman estates. The Romanization of Libya was a methodical and relentless process. The Romans were masters of infrastructure and administration. They built aqueducts that snaked across the arid landscape, bringing life-giving water to new cities. Roads were paved, connecting the interior to the coast and binding the province ever tighter to the heart of the empire in Rome. Cities like Leptis Magna and Sabratha began to rise, their forums, temples, and amphitheaters built in gleaming marble, magnificent testaments to Roman engineering and power. In these new urban centers, Latin became the language of law, commerce, and polite society. The local Punic and Berber tongues, once the vibrant pulse of daily life, began to fade into the background, spoken mainly in homes and remote villages. While these cities flourished, becoming hubs of trade exporting olive oil, grain, and exotic animals for the Roman games, this prosperity was not shared equally. Vast agricultural estates, known as latifundia, were established, often on land that had been communal pastures for Berber tribes. These tribes were pushed to the margins, forced to adapt to a new reality where their traditional way of life was no longer viable. Their sorrow was for pastures lost and a freedom that felt as distant as the horizon. Each aqueduct, while a marvel of engineering, was also a symbol of a victory snatched from the jaws of their despair, a constant reminder of who was now in control. But why was Rome so determined to chain this distant jewel to its empire? What aching desperation whispered through the Senate? The answer lies in the turbulent politics of the late Roman Republic. North Africa was a breadbasket, a source of immense wealth and strategic importance. Controlling it meant controlling a vital food supply for the city of Rome and its massive army. It was a prize worth fighting for. And fight they did. The internal power struggles of Rome spilled onto Libyan soil. In 46 BC, after his victory at the Battle of Thapsus, Julius Caesar annexed the remaining independent kingdom of Numidia, creating the province of Africa Nova. This was not a conquest against a foreign enemy but the conclusion of a bloody civil war fought between Romans. Local populations were caught in the crossfire, their loyalties divided, their sons conscripted, and their lands ravaged. The sorrow for kin lost in these conflicts added another layer to the region's grief. After Caesar's assassination and another round of civil wars, it was his heir, Augustus, who brought a semblance of order. In 23 AD, he reorganized the provinces, establishing a new administrative framework. The arrival of his reforms was met with a mix of fear and hope. Fear of new taxes and a more rigid imperial control, but also hope for the fragile dream of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. The promise was an end to the constant warfare and a new era of stability and security. For many, this peace was worth the price of independence. Each new road, each fortified garrison, was a tangible symbol of this new order, a victory snatched from the despair of chaos. By the 1st century AD, Libya had indeed become a beacon of Roman might. The province was peaceful, productive, and deeply integrated into the imperial system. But beneath the surface of this Romanized prosperity, the spirit of the land still held its sorrow. A Berber elder, his face weathered by the sun and time, might look upon the sprawling Roman villas and remember a time when his people roamed freely. The cost of empire lingered in every family divided by new borders, in every story of a tribe displaced, in every soul scarred by the memory of subjugation. It was a lament for an independence that now seemed as parched and barren as the desert itself. The grandeur of Roman Libya was, in many ways, a fragile marble edifice. For centuries, it thrived, an interconnected world of trade and culture. But this dream, built on conquest, would eventually shatter. As the Roman Empire itself began to wither from internal strife and external pressures, its grip on its provinces weakened. The grand cities were neglected, their aqueducts crumbled, and the desert began to reclaim the cultivated fields. Families who had known only Roman rule now faced an uncertain future, mourning the departure of the legions that had both protected and oppressed them. The land itself seemed to weep with the departure of its children, Roman and Libyan alike, into the mists of history. This era of fragile marble, which had turned dreams of imperial glory into reality, ultimately left behind shattered hopes. The sorrow of those crushed beneath the empire's weight echoed through the centuries. Today, when we walk through the magnificent ruins of Leptis Magna or Sabratha, it's easy to be awed by the scale of Roman ambition. But we must also listen for the quieter stories. What forces truly brought the eagles of Rome to this land? Was it a grand historical destiny, the will of Jupiter himself? Or was it simply human ambition, greed, and the relentless logic of power? And as the empire fell, did the land itself rebel? Do the buried forums and silent amphitheaters hide ancient Berber curses that whispered of decay and shattered the Romans' weary hold? From the ashes of Carthage to its transformation into a heartbroken province, the story of Roman Libya is a complex tapestry of prosperity and pain. Its soul, a fusion of Berber, Punic, and Roman influences, endures to this day. Yet, the full veil of the conquest remains drawn, hiding the silent cries of lost tribes and fallen dreams. As we gaze upon the forsaken stones, we must ask, what untold heartaches still guard the memory of the eagle? What are your thoughts on this complex legacy? Share your reflections in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories from the ancient world.